Konnichiwa, Dr. Braces here. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are so excited to have you. Today is going to be a very fun and interesting topic. We're going to talk about tongue rings. That doesn't come up very often in the orthodontic office, but it is something that can cause you problems. And so we just wanted to discuss what scenarios that would be. Now, I would say 90 to 95% of patients with tongue rings, it's not going to do any damage or any harm to their teeth. But there are certain situations where it can cause you issues. The issues are when you have a habit that we call a tongue thrust. Now, what a tongue thrust is when we swallow, our tongue is supposed to very lightly touch our teeth. And that's like a natural swallowing motion, is the tongue very, very lightly, hardly at all touches the teeth or not at all. Now, some people have what's called a tongue thrust. And what that means is when they swallow, they thrust their tongue very, very hard into their front teeth. A patient like that, the side effects of that is that their teeth are sometimes flared, right? Because the tongue, most people don't realize this, but the tongue is a strong enough muscle where it can actually move your teeth. And how this was explained to me, I was not able to find this exact study. I'll continue to look for it. But in ortho school, I was taught that there was a study done on monkeys where they actually kind of this was in the 60s, so animal rights wasn't as big of a thing. They cut the cheeks out of these monkeys, and then they just wanted to see what would happen to the teeth. And so over time, the side that the cheeks were cut off, the teeth just flared way out because you didn't have anything to balance the forces of the tongue when you swallow. And so anyways, we now know though that the tongue is a strong enough muscle to move the teeth. And if you're thrusting hard into the teeth, it's going to cause you orthodontic problems. Now, add a tongue ring to that equation. So let's say you have a strong tongue thrust and you have now added a tongue ring onto that tongue. Every time you thrust that metal tongue ring onto your teeth, it's going to cause bigger and bigger issues. And I'm going to show you a case where I saw just that.
Patient that came to see me a couple weeks ago, and her chief complaint, so her main concern, was the gap between her front teeth. This is what the gap looked like, and my first thought was, okay, she lost a tooth, she's missing a tooth. Then on further evaluation, I said, you know what, she's actually not missing a tooth. So now I have to ask myself, how did we get here? Because if we don't have any spacing on the top, right? So here's the front view. Here's the top. Okay. If we don't have any spacing on the top, why do we have a massive gap on the bottom? And so as we dug into this, she informed me that she had a tongue ring, that she felt like every time she swallowed with her tongue ring, it was banging into her teeth. First, I kind of thought to myself, it probably wasn't the tongue ring that caused this problem. But then as we dug into it more, I watched her swallow, I watched her talk, and she did have a very, very, very strong tongue thrust. And so every time she swallowed, her tongue would bang into these bottom teeth and the tongue ring would hit those teeth, and over time it caused that space to actually happen. That's pretty fascinating to me. I had never seen one this bad, so I reached out to colleagues of mine, other orthodontists, and I showed them these pictures and I said, have you guys ever seen anything like this? And they pretty much all of them had seen something similar to a case like this where a tongue ring caused some sort of, severe space. Now the worst part for her is, let's view it from the front here. What has happened is not only did the tongue ring with the tongue thrust cause this space, but she also lost some bone here. So it actually caused the bone to start to resorb. Now, if you look at right here on the this bone, that's where her bone normally is. And if you compare it to here, it's dropped about 3 to 4 millimeters. You're really going to be able to visualize this here on the x-ray, okay? So on the x-ray, you can see that here's the bone level on front teeth. On the back side of the tooth, here is the bone level on the front side of the tooth. So the tongue ring, one side of the tooth has caused pretty severe bone loss, to the point where I said, I can't orthodontically move these teeth, or I can't close this space until two things happen. Number one, you see a periodontist and they let us know if this area needs a graft before we start moving teeth. Number two, you see an endodontist and we get this checked out. Endodontist is a root canal specialist. Long story short, here you can visualize just how much damage that tongue ring actually caused her. So that's something that I hadn't personally seen before. I had heard of it, but once I saw it clinically, I'm like, okay, this can actually cause you problems. Now, like I said, majority of patients that have tongue rings, as long as they don't thrust their tongue, it's not going to cause any problems and it's not going to do any damage. But if you have one of those tongue thrust habits, definitely don't get a tongue ring. And if you have one already, you're going to want to take that tongue ring out.
So that was a pretty interesting case. I was super excited to share that with everyone because it's rare, like I said, but you can see how much problem a tongue ring can actually cause if you have something like a tongue thrust habit. So the main goal orthodontically in a case like that, number one, I showed you how there's bone loss around the incisors. If I go move those two front teeth and close that space, guess what? They're probably just going to tip like this because there's no bone. And the case is probably, I'm going to cause her more problems and she might end up losing those teeth. So for her, step number one would be, again, go see a periodontist. That is a gum and bone specialist. So they're going to evaluate that area. They're going to see if she needs a graft. And once they give me a stamp of approval, I can start moving those teeth. Now, let's just say, hypothetically, in that case, there's no bone loss. The bone looks great. There's just a space. How would I close it? I could do that two different ways. We could do that with braces. We could do that with Invisalign. Either one would work fine in that case. And time-wise, that's always a big question, is which one would be faster? Probably depends. Probably a space that big, though, the braces would go a little bit faster. But definitely could close that space both with braces and Invisalign. But again, the bone is the limiting factor there. Long story short, for majority of people, having a tongue ring is not going to cause you any problems. I don't want to scare you if you have one. But if you do get a tongue ring and you notice that, for example, a space between your bottom teeth is starting to open up, don't wait. Go see an orthodontist, have them evaluate your tongue, see what happens when you swallow, and they may instruct you to take that tongue ring out. The patient that I just showed you, that was probably over the course of at least 6 months to a year that it got that bad. So just be mindful of it. If you get your tongue ring and you start to notice teeth moving, teeth shifting, go ahead and get evaluated. Don't wait too long, because you don't want to go to a point where you start losing bone support around the teeth, because at that point it becomes infinitely more challenging to fix and to correct. If you do have a tongue ring and you've had it for a while and you haven't noticed any change in your teeth, you're probably fine. You're probably okay. So just keep all those things in mind. Hope this helps. The ultimate goal here is to make it so that our community of patients and people around the world don't run into these kind of severe issues, and prevent them wherever you can. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We'll be sure to get back to you. And our next topic is going to be kind of a touchy one. Anyone who's had braces has probably had to wear rubber bands. So we're going to talk about rubber bands. How do you put them on to fix certain types of bites? Why is it important, and how do they work? So click on the link below. Thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, smiles change lives, so keep smiling.